Chapter 312, Sienna Meridian 8. Eugene's assertion wasn't baseless. It was true that he didn't have sufficient evidence for absolute certainty, yet he could not sense vermouth in the vermouth he saw portrayed in the projection. The relentless pressure vermouth put on Sienna, his attacks, his movements, all of it had overwhelmed Sienna, yet Eugene could not sense the vermouth he remembered from 300 years ago. And Eugene couldn't help but put great trust in his own perception. Hamel, who had fought closest to vermouth 3 centuries ago, was the only one among his companions who had repeatedly engaged vermouth in combat. "Right?" said Sienna, turning to Eugene with a bright expression. "I believe it was Sir Vermouth at the end." Anise gave a slight nod in agreement. "Initially he intended to kill her," said Eugene. "The battle had been one-sided from the moment Vermouth lured Sienna and confronted her in the corridor. He had manipulated Sienna's actions by throwing Hamel's corpse and persistently aiming for her neck. When Sienna made the decision to flee with the corpse and return to the corridor, Vermouth had been lurking behind her and could have easily killed Sienna if he wanted to. He could have chosen to crush her skull or slit her throat. However, Vermouth did not do any of those things. During the battle, he persistently aimed for her vital points. However, when he was presented with the opportunity to kill her with certainty, he merely pierced through her body. "Well, technically speaking, a person usually dies when their chest is pierced," muttered Sienna. "Yes. If the heart bursts, one dies," Anise concurred. Eugene nodded as well while coughing awkwardly. "Well, that is true, but if he truly wanted to kill her, he had other surefire methods. Look at the end. Vermouth reached out to your neck, Sienna, but he didn't snap it or strangle you. He just tore off your necklace," said Eugene. Vermouth's following actions also seemed strange. Vermouth had flung Sienna's body into the room. There had been no reason he could not move, but he had left Sienna to escape using the World Tree's leaf. He had trembling shoulders, a twisted expression and quivering eyes. Eugene had seen Vermouth when he wore that expression. After seeing Vermouth's final expression, Eugene understood Sienna's words, that it had felt like Vermouth but also not Vermouth. "Did he grow old and get dementia?" grumbled Eugene with a scowl. Anise scoffed and shook her head before saying, "People older than him have not developed dementia, so there's no way Sir Vermouth would have." "Oi, are you referring to me?" Sienna immediately reacted, turning her head. But Anise shrugged nonchalantly. "Don't project your baseless speculations onto me and bare your fangs, Sienna. Why would I talk about you in such a way? Don't lie." "You were talking about me," shouted Sienna. "No, I wasn't." "What? Did it hit a nerve?" mocked Anise. "Why are you two fighting again?" asked Eugene after releasing a deep sigh. "Because Sienna keeps picking fights with me," Anise complained immediately. "When did I ever?" Engaging in needless dispute then denying the act is not a display of maturity. Eugene grappled with his growing headache. To his side sat Sienna and Anise, locked in a petty squabble. Eugene steadied himself, standing tall as a barrier to prevent them from tugging each other's hair. "As for certain, we don't know much, but it's clear that Vermouth has not died," he said, recounting his encounter with Molen to Sienna. The fact that Molen still lived did not seem to surprise Sienna. She nodded in acceptance right away. "That imbecile would never die of old age," she muttered, though her expression progressively worsened as the story unfolded. Though he was pushed to the brink of insanity, Molen was heeding the request of Vermouth from his dream. Even at this moment, Molen stood at the chilly frontier of the north, warding off an indescribable beast known as the Nur. He had done so every day for 150 relentless years. "I wondered why he had not returned if he wasn't dead," Sienna mumbled under her breath while sniffling. The Molen she remembered was a fool of a man, never screaming in pain, charging forward even when his limbs flew. He may have been simpler and more obtuse than Hamel, but it was because Molen always blazed the trail that everyone else could follow. She could not believe that such a man was driven to madness by unending solitude and burden, that he'd been self-flagellating in a world void of all but his thoughts. "It's not so bad that you should cry. A good thrashing straightened him out," Eugene interjected. "Wasn't it the opposite? Hamel, weren't you the one who was given a proper beating?" said Anise. "To be precise, both Molen and I were merrily beating each other," Eugene corrected in all seriousness. "Molen did not even shed a single drop of blood," retorted Anise. "If I had a proper weapon with me, then what do you think would have happened? If I had even a worthless iron sword, Molin wouldn't simply have gotten a nosebleed. He would have lost an arm, Eugene stubbornly replied while folding his arms. I simply didn't want to make my old comrade a cripple. And at that time I needed to take some hits from Molin. By getting the opportunity to exchange blows with me, Molin could shed some of his madness, relieve some stress. Yes, I understand. Please Hamel, stop there, Anise interrupted with a sigh while glancing at Eugene with ridicule. Sienna had been listening to the conversation. She chuckled in response as she wiped away her tears. So he is no longer alone then, said Sienna. Eugene and Anise stopped their bickering and focused on Sienna. I can understand how Molin was feeling. Hamel, you died like an idiot. Vermouth was dead, Anise was dead, and I, the only one who was somewhat alive, disappeared into seclusion. While Molin was left alone in the world, continued Sienna. The only thing that kept Molin standing had been Vermouth's request. Sienna wiped away all her tears before closing her eyes. I don't know what the Nur is. A legend from the northern tribes. There's no way I could know. So I'll have to see it for myself next time. I'll say hi to Molin as well, said Sienna. I told Molin that I would bring Vermouth with me, Eugene murmured with a smirk. We'll drag that bastard by the scruff of his neck when the time comes. But we should meet Molin together before that, Sienna. It's quite a distance, though. It was impossible to ascertain why Vermouth ended up the way he did. All Eugene, Sienna, and Anise could do was make vague guesses. We don't even know the contents of the oath, the promise Vermouth made with incarceration. 5 became 4 after Hamel's death. However, retreating had not been an option. Once inside, escaping the Demon King of Incarceration's castle was impossible. So they had vanquished the demonic monsters and the demon folks blocking their way. Vermouth's sword had been imbued with an intensity not seen in any of their previous battles. Molin rampaged while roaring in his grief, a wailing echo that shook the halls of the castle. Anise's back had been drenched with sweat as she fervently chanted prayers. Sienna had raised her staff while crying, her voice so hoarse with sorrow that she could barely speak. Higher and higher they climbed until they reached the zenith of the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration, the highest floor of Babel. They had swiftly defeated the Blade, who blocked the entrance. Afterward, they busted down the door before charging into the court. Sienna grumbled with a scowl, "It's impossible to extract the memories from them like we just did." They had already tried multiple times in the past, aiming to understand who the Demon King of Incarceration was, how he had dominated the battlefield, and why they had been doomed to defeat. They wished to scrutinize everything from the start to the end, but it had proven impossible. They had an inkling of the cause. When they had engaged in battle, the Demon King of Incarceration's iron chains had occupied the space. The chains had interfered with Sienna's magic and Anise's divine power. The chains, like the moniker of the Demon King, had claimed the entire battlefield and disrupted their powers. Even now, hundreds of years later, the chains bound Sienna's memory, preventing her from visualizing what they had witnessed and experienced with magic. The battle was one-sided, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. With the Demon King's chains binding us, Anise and I could not fight properly. The space, which was sealed off by the chains, seemed to exist solely for the Demon King. I couldn't unleash my magic freely, and Anise's divine power was robbed of its usual radiant light. Anise's weakened divine power meant that she could not heal Molin as she typically would. Thus, Molin had been unable to fight as recklessly as he had against the other Demon Kings. In the natural course of things, all of us should have perished inside Babel, said Sienna. That is, had Vermouth not made his pact, Anise interjected. The specifics of the promise remained a mystery, but the Demon King of Incarceration had withdrawn as a result. This allowed Sienna, Anise, and Molin to escape Babel with their lives while even reclaiming Hamel's body and soul. With that, peace was restored. The Demon King of Incarceration no longer encroached on the continent, and the demons, monsters, and dark wizards that once ravaged the lands retreated to Helmuth. Even the Demon King of Destruction, who had roamed Helmuth, returned to his domain, Ravesta, and thus stayed silent for hundreds of years. Judging by that, the Demon King of Incarceration only suffered losses. He spared those he could have killed and returned your body and soul, which he had captured. He even ended a war that had spanned decades. His act of transforming Helmuth into an empire? Had he simply continued the war, the entire continent would have been his territory, said Sienna. Vermouth, Eugene uttered the name softly. Perhaps Vermouth offered himself as the price for the oath. That's the only explanation that comes to mind right away. If Vermouth became a slave to the demon king of incarceration. Well, that would somewhat explain everything, Sienna answered. Somewhat indeed, commented Anise. Then they all fell silent. Even if their speculation were true, there were still many questions that were left unanswered. The demon king of incarceration knew many things. He knew that Eugene was Hamel's reincarnation and that Anise resided within Christina. In addition, he was seemingly aware of Molin's current situation as well. It was also possible that he knew Sienna had been kept alive, sealed away in the World Tree. Despite knowing all this, the demon king of incarceration remained inactive. Was it possible that he had only pretended to be a pacifist on the surface while sabotaging them from behind the scenes? Had he used Vermouth? There was no need for him to do so. After all, Vermouth had planned to resurrect Hamel from the start. Yet Vermouth had died before he could implement his plan. At least that's what the world was told. Afterward, the demon king of incarceration manipulated Vermouth into inflicting a fatal blow to Sienna. It was clear that her death had been intended, but Vermouth had regained control of himself and stopped himself from delivering the killing blow. Before striking Sienna, Vermouth had sealed the moonlight sword's hilt in Hamel's grave. After wounding Sienna, he stole the necklace in which Hamel's soul was sealed before hiding it in the Lionheart's treasure vault to prepare for Hamel's reincarnation. Decades later, he appeared in Molin's dreams to deliver a warning about the Nur. It was all extremely puzzling. Vermouth's actions were mysterious and chaotic, even if the demon king of incarceration was actually involved. There's no doubt. That bastard Vermouth's lost his marbles, Eugene declared stubbornly. No sane person would do such things. Vermouth was likely, or rather undoubtedly alive, but his mind seemed to be swinging wildly. Whether this was due to his pact with the demon king of incarceration or something else, one thing was clear: Vermouth was still alive. We just need to give him a good beating, said Anise. As long as he was alive, there were things they could try. If he was dead, there would be nothing they could do, but since he was alive, they could at least make an attempt. If we punch a hole in his chest, he might regain his senses from the pain, Eugene suggested. There was no way Vermouth could be of sound mind if he was pulling stunts like this. Eugene, Sienna, and Anise all believed so. Vermouth, from their memories, would never do things without reason. The man that the world revered as the Great Vermouth was just Vermouth to them. Once we reach the Demon King's castle, Babel, we might find some answers, Eugene said with a bitter laugh. Just as I did, stand before the Demon King of incarceration and meet with his true body. The Demon King of incarceration will not let you climb Babel in peace, since that's the kind of being he is. It was what Vermouth had said in the dark room. What will happen after that are things you will have to experience yourself. Although I still think it's nonsense. Regardless, they had to climb Babel to kill the Demon King of incarceration and to learn more about Vermouth. Sienna nodded after hearing Eugene's story about the dark room. Vermouth was obsessed with you, she said with a bitter smile. Hamel Dinah's. 300 years ago, before we met you. You were just a somewhat famous mercenary. That time, I didn't understand when Vermouth insisted on having you join us. I'm sure. I didn't understand it either, responded Eugene. But eventually I started to think that Vermouth was right. You, who were the weakest among us, became strong enough to stand by Vermouth's side within a few years. If Vermouth decided to resurrect you, there must have been a reason for it, continued Sienna. Truth be told, I was the only viable option, Eugene grumbled with a snort. Sienna, you were still alive, and so was Molin. Anise turned into an angel. I was the only one who died quietly and had my soul sealed. Are you trying to brag about that? Questioned Anise. That's right, you bastard. Are you proud that you died like a stupid fool? Sienna chimed in as well. Can we not talk about the time I died, please? After being reincarnated, I did come to realize that my death was rather idiotic, Eugene mumbled. It would have been nice if you had realized that when you were still alive, said Sienna. But I suppose we should be relieved. If Hamel's soul had fully ascended, reincarnation would have been much more difficult. Anise interjected, a sly smile playing on her lips as she glanced at Sienna. Now that we're on the subject, Sienna, when you decided to seal Hamel's soul in a necklace instead of allowing him to ascend to heaven, I honestly thought, despite our grief, that it was a bit too much. What about it? Anise, you agreed to it too. It wasn't just me. None of you wanted Eugene to be reborn in a world with the Demon Kings, did you? Retorted Sienna. Well, yes, but after thinking it over several times, I felt that you wearing the necklace containing his sealed soul constantly was a bit excessive. Especially as a woman of faith. What then? What else would I do with a necklace except hang it around my neck? Sienna questioned. There were other methods, surely. The soul could have been sealed anywhere. My neck was the safest place. You really only kept it around your neck? You hang a necklace around your neck. What else would I have done with it? Sienna asked while turning her head. Anise peered at Sienna's face, her eyes narrowing into a questioning gaze. For example, rubbing it against your face and calling out Hamel's name when you felt overwhelmed by your emotions. What are you saying? My ears really hurt from the two of you screaming like this. Eugene, no longer able to bear the racket, slowly rose from his seat. Weren't you going to drink together? Shouldn't you get to it? This is my room, answered Anise. Ah, right. We'll have fun. I'm off to my room to sleep. With those words, Eugene turned his gaze towards Mare, who was sitting on the bed. Mare gave a firm shake of her head. I will be attending to Lady Sienna with drinks here. Rhaenyra quickly jumped down from the bed at Mare's words. She was somewhat scared of Sienna from the earlier fight when she had been fighting and pulling out Eugene's hair. I guess I have no choice. This lady will go with the benefactor. Where do you think you're going? Anise called out before Rhaenyra could finish her sentence. That one there, she's Raizakia's daughter, right? I have a bit of a score to settle with your dad. But don't worry. It's nothing to be scared of. Rhaenyra began to tremble after being singled out by Sienna. She looked at Eugene with pleading eyes, but he was already halfway out of the room. If I stay in there any longer, I'm really going to lose all my hair. Even if his hair would regrow one day, he had no desire to go bald either. Chapter 313, Sienna Meridian 9. The clamor of the drunken revelry next door did not penetrate the peace of Eugene's room. The soundproofing in this exorbitantly expensive hotel was remarkable, and Eugene had cast an additional spell to ensure an undisturbed slumber. Was he missing out on the boisterous camaraderie? Nope, he was not bothered in the slightest. After all, he had shared his fill of drinks in the past life, and he knew there would be countless opportunities to do so in the future. Moreover, he was well aware that his presence wouldn't do much to enhance the revelries. In fact, he didn't know what kind of fate might have awaited him had he joined in the drinking. He awoke in his plush bed, finding the hour to be about 4 a.m. He sensed a lingering presence outside his firmly shut door. He remained still and silent as he opened his eyes. In the lavish suite of this high-end hotel in the capital of Aroth, Pentagon, who could be pacing outside his door at this ungodly hour? Eugene suppressed a rising sigh and forced his eyes shut, pulling the duvet higher. As if on cue, the door burst open, piercing through the barrier of his soundproofing spell. The raucous laughter of drunken fools shattered the tranquility of Eugene's pre-dawn. Hey Meal, are you asleep? Hey, you're not sleeping. Eugene pulled the blanket over his head pleadingly while maintaining silence. But the drunkards persisted relentlessly, their laughter laced with the stench of alcohol. They snickered at each other, hiccuping, seeming to find the whole situation immensely amusing. Help! Mercy! The voices of Mare and Rhaenyra, who had been serving the pair drinks until this late hour, sounded pitifully desperate. While Eugene couldn't see them from under his blanket, he could tell they would be a miserable sight. Their faces were marked with haphazard scribbles, and their hair was styled in the most bizarre fashion imaginable. Mare's hair was gathered at the top of her head like a pineapple, while Rhaenyra's black hair was braided into numerous strands. The two drunkards approached Eugene's bed, moaning like the undead. Hey! Sienna reached out and snatched the blanket. Eugene didn't want to surrender his last line of defense. He held onto the blanket tightly, but Anise's fist found its way to Eugene's ribs with a pop. Ugh! It was an unexpected blow. Eugene had trained his body since he could barely walk, and it was backed by the mana he had cultivated through the White Flame formula. His body was trained to withstand any ordinary blow, but this sharp and powerful punch was more than what one would expect from a drunkard. As a result, his grip on the duvet loosened, and the hawk-eyed Sienna didn't miss the opportunity and swiftly pulled the blanket away. Why are you doing this to me? Eugene questioned them pitifully while clasping his sore ribs. He could relate to Edmund, whom he had killed in the forest. I didn't do anything, so why are you tormenting me? Sienna draped the stolen blanket over her shoulders like a cloak, laughing wickedly. Anise applauded as she joined in the laughter. To Eugene they appeared like demons that had crawled up from hell. Behind the drunken devils, Rhaenyra and Mare, dressed in completely ridiculous outfits, shivered and clung to each other. Let me tell you, Sienna hiccuped, slurring her words. Baffled by this display, Eugene let out a desperate cry. Why are you drunk? For an ordinary person, intoxication was the expected consequence of imbibing spirits. Yet, upon reaching a certain level of mastery, one could cast off the effects of drunkenness at will, or so it should be. Then what about shaking oneself clear of alcohol after becoming drunk to the point of oblivion? It was an improbable scenario for the average individual, but it was more plausible for the likes of Sienna and Anise. They had safeguards implanted in their subconscious to shake off the inebriation and awaken their senses when needed. Yet no such signs were evident in the pair now. They were like two dogs who had lost themselves entirely to alcohol. You drink to get drunk. It's our first meeting in hundreds of years. It's only natural to drink until we're drunk. Sienna and Anise reasoned in unison, their faces meeting in fits of giggles. Then Sienna turned to Eugene, wiping away tears of laughter. Hold on. I'm not finished. I was talking about Christina. Sienna swayed closer to Eugene and began to pat his shoulder. When we first spoke I thought, what a cocky bastard. But when we spoke again. She's bold and cocky. Yep, that's for sure. But she's not bad. Hold on. Anise barked. She slapped her lips, straightened her posture and sat at the edge of the bed. Christina Rogerus. At Anise's loud call of her name, the control of the body instantly shifted to Christina. Yes. Christina responded enthusiastically, raising her hand in acknowledgement. Eugene had hoped that Christina might put an end to this farce, but seeing her face he knew that his hopes were dashed. She appeared even more drunk than Anise. So we all had a good talk and it's so unfair to Christina, shouted Sienna. What was? Asked Eugene. Anise kissed you, right? And I kissed you too. But Christina, you haven't kissed him. Right. Yes. Christina nodded enthusiastically. Eugene was dumbstruck, unable to utter a word, his eyes blinking in confusion. He tried to reason with the ladies. Everyone, aren't you all a little too drunk? It's unfair and sad, shouted Sienna, ignoring Eugene's desperate attempts at persuasion. Yes. Christina agreed even more fervently. So, we talked a lot about it, right? If you kissed her secretly I'd be furious. So... Sienna trailed off. Right here. Christina thrust her hands into the air, shouting. We will do it right here where Sienna can see us. Kya. Sienna clapped her hands as a jubilant roar escaped her lips. Eugene quickly closed his mouth and hesitantly inched backward. I think you've all had too much to drink. How are you going to cope when morning comes and the effects of the alcohol wear off? Do not flee. Stay put. Sienna shouted, and Christina raised her hands high as though wielding an axe and latched onto Eugene's shoulder. This was when fear jittered in Eugene's eyes. We've decided what to do, Sienna declared. Yes. Christina's blue eyes bore into Eugene. Think about it, Sir Eugene. When Lady Anise stole a kiss from you I was unconscious. What does it matter? Of course. I shared Sister's memory after waking up, but the touch and emotions of that moment belonged to Sister, not me. Christina shouted to make her point. You refer to Anise as Sister? Eugene had heard it a few times before, clearly a slip of her tongue, but when she was sober had tried to hide it. Clearly Christina was far from sober now. So what I want to say is, it's not fair and it's lonely. Lady Anise and Lady Sienna have had their kiss, and yet I've been left out, shouted Christina. Kiss. Eugene was stupefied. Yes, a kiss. Smooch, smooch. Christina's face was alarmingly close now. Sister stole a kiss and Lady Sienna had hers stolen, so it is only logical that you and I, together, should have a kiss. Kiss him. Sienna's cheering sent ripples of courage through the alcohol-fogged room. Christina swallowed hard and, with a flash of realization, turned her head away. Phew. She huffed, exhaling strongly. 4 hours they had drunk wildly. They had indulged in alcohol as if there was no tomorrow. Now she was worried that the smell of alcohol would be off-putting to Eugene. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't appropriate for this monumental moment either. Without a word, Christina swiftly pulled out a tiny glass bottle from her possession. It was the breath freshener she always carried, ready to use at any moment. She sprayed a small amount inside her mouth, swished it around a few times, and then took a few more breaths to check the smell. "Are you sure you're drunk?" Eugene asked tentatively. "Kiss." Eugene's desperate, hasty inquiry was cut off by Sienna's sudden shout. Christina had no intention of responding to Eugene's question either. Her mind was filled with the symphony of Anis's screams, Sienna's cries of "smooch, smooch," and the pounding of her own heart. Christina closed her lips, then puckered up and slowly moved towards Eugene. Eugene, however, did not offer his lips but only trembled in response. What in the world was happening? Eugene thought, reeling from the impossible and preposterous circumstances unfolding before him. Should he staunchly reject what was happening? Was it permissible? How would they face each other afterward? But it wasn't absent. Yet the affection Eugene harbored for Christina was not intense enough to warrant a kiss, and he still possessed a lucid human heart. "I will try to make you fall in love with us," Anis had once declared this in Euros. At the time, Eugene assumed the us referred to her and Sienna, but later he also came to feel Christina's emotions. Anis and Christina both acted true to their word. Their attempts to win Eugene's heart differed. Anis chose a more sly and assertive approach while Christina pursued him, transforming her admiration into longing and longing into desire. And now Christina was drawing near Eugene with an intense desire. It was tempting. Christina and Anis had taken advantage of Sienna's absence to carefully infiltrate his heart, and eventually they succeeded. Thus, Eugene found himself unable to firmly push Christina away. But he was also unable to lean forward and offer his lips as she had. Christina slightly opened her eyes, staring at Eugene. She saw that his face, which was close enough for their breaths to mingle, was dabbled with sweat. He had an awkward expression. Her expectations had been wrong. Even though she had bravely taken the plunge, fueled by alcohol and encouragement, she had considered the odds of success to be slim. If Eugene gently pushed her away, she resolved to smile it off without issue. She had been prepared. After all, there was no rush. If not now, she believed she could slowly open her heart and approach him later. But contrary to her expectation, Eugene did not push Christina away. He was clearly uncomfortable, not knowing what to do, but he didn't let go of her hands either. It was now time to proceed further. Once hazy, Christina was now fully alert. She let go of Eugene's shoulders and her hands snuck upward. Her palms gently pressed against his cheeks. Eugene made a slight noise as the pressure pushed his lips outward. Now was the time. Christina seized the opportunity like a predator snatching its prey, leaning in to initiate a kiss. Smooch. Their lips met. Eugene's wide eyes trembled in surprise. Christina kept the pressure on, holding the kiss. Tongue. Anis exclaimed in the background, but Christina ignored the suggestion. She didn't want that kind of kiss yet. She wanted to savor the anticipation of slowly progressing toward that later. Hyuk, Sienna gasped. Although she had been enthusiastically cheering and waving her arms around, she was still taken aback by the unexpected display of affection in front of her. She bit her lip, her emotions roiling in confusion. This unfamiliar sensation was indescribable. It was just a kiss after all. That had been her initial thought, and since she was drunk, she had confidently permitted it. But now, what was this feeling? Anger? Annoyance? No, it was slightly different. It was an emotion that wasn't entirely wholesome. It was a thrill tilted towards guilty pleasure. Like her Hamel, Eugene was being kissed by another woman right in front of her. There was certainly jealousy about the loss, but it was not completely displeasing. Instead, it made her heart pound. What was this peculiar emotion? The root of these complex feelings lay in the fact that this kiss was happening with Sienna's permission. Thus, Sienna was incapable of experiencing pure rage or irritation at the spectacle. Instead, she felt something else. A dark, addictive flame that threatened to consume her. This black fire made her senses reel as if merely watching it was intoxicating. If she approached, if she ventured any closer, it felt as if she would be drawn into the dance with those flames. Phew. The lips finally broke apart. Christina took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto Eugene's face. Sienna's hands were soaked with sweat as she clenched the hem of her dress tightly while swallowing hard. Eugene felt as if his mind had become numb. What was this? What was this spectacle supposed to mean? Dignity? Pride? Fundamental questions and shame about himself painted Eugene's face a deep crimson. Heck, hee. Christina let out a chuckle while observing Eugene's state. Christina gently squeezed Eugene's cheeks once before hopping off the bed, feeling invigorated. Let's go back to bed. Huh, what? I am satisfied. I feel as if I could ascend to heaven right now. With a reverent expression, Christina traced the holy symbol once before turning around and walking away without any hesitation. Sienna watched Christina's retreating back in a daze, then swallowing hard she rose to her feet. Sleep well. Though Sienna was trying her best not to acknowledge the black flame still flickering inside her, she was afraid that she would eventually become fascinated by it. But now was not the time. This flame should only blaze upon her permission, and Sienna would always remain ahead of it. So Sienna quickly followed Christina. Eugene was left sitting on the bed in a daze. The door that had been left open slowly closed. Ahem. A low grumble came from within the cloak. It was WNYD. Not knowing what to say to Eugene at this moment, Tempest simply emitted a dry cough. Sir Eugene. Benefactor. Rhaenyra and Mare, who had been discarded in their disarray, slowly crawled up to Eugene's bed. Blinking his eyes in a daze, Eugene silently embraced the approaching pair. You've had it tough, he said. In a few hours the sun would rise. Eugene feared the coming of the morning. Chapter 314, Abram, 1. Morning came. After preparing his heart, Eugene opened the door to Christina's room. Sienna and Christina sat opposite each other at the dining table. They were enjoying a steaming bright red stew, or perhaps it was a soup, but they ceased their activity upon seeing Eugene. Are you two feeling all right? Eugene asked after a pause. Sienna set down her spoon and patted her chest while coughing. She had fallen asleep in her drunken state, not wanting to regain full consciousness. Upon waking and shaking off the intoxication, she found herself almost without a hangover. She remembered everything that had happened at dawn. Alcohol was the enemy. After clearing her throat a few times, she looked at Eugene calmly. However, her carefully controlled breath and expression crumbled like sand as soon as her eyes met Eugene's. Sienna opened and closed her mouth a few times like a goldfish before swiftly turning her head away. Her spoon sat innocently within her sight. She took hold of it, stirring the unfortunate stew unnecessarily harshly. While Sienna was doing so, Christina picked up a napkin. With graceful hand movements, she shook the napkin and gently wiped her mouth. Did you sleep well? Christina inquired before setting down the napkin and giving Eugene a warm smile. The memories of dawn were clear to her as well. Feelings of embarrassment lingered, but a much greater sense of contentment eclipsed them. Such a scary, formidable child. Sienna realized Christina was not an opponent to be underestimated. She looked at Christina, who was smiling as if nothing was amiss, and grinning slightly, she pulled out the chair next to her as she addressed Eugene. If you're hungry, why don't you eat with us? Although he wasn't particularly hungry, Eugene took the suggested seat, between Sienna and Christina. As if she had been waiting, Christina scooped some food onto a fresh plate for him. It'll take at least a decade, won't it? Asked Christina. What will? Asked Eugene. To defeat the Demon King and hold a wedding, Christina stated casually. Eugene nearly choked on the food he had been spooning absent-mindedly. Clutching his throat, he coughed and spluttered. Next to him, Sienna dropped her spoon on the table in shock. Wait, a wedding? Eugene asked, looking stunned. Why are you surprised? Isn't it natural that the end of a relationship is marriage? Christina asked calmly. Wedding. All Sienna could do was stutter. We are not in a situation to hold a ceremony immediately, and nobody is mentally prepared yet. Sir Eugene, you, Lady Sienna, and even Lady Anise have been wishing for the death of the demon kings for hundreds of years. To save the world perfectly. After achieving all that, it won't be too late to think about everything else. We can approach everything step by step, explained Christina. Clap, clap, clap. The sound of applause echoed in Christina's mind. Yes. After a moment of fluster, even Sienna nodded firmly. It was indeed the future they had dreamed of centuries ago. After slaying all demon kings and saving the world, she had planned to hold a grand wedding ceremony. They would rent out an entire majestic castle, inviting every notable person from across the continent to fill the guest seats. Sienna had once dreamed of such a lavish wedding, one unparalleled in history and unlikely to be surpassed in the future. If it were possible, she was even willing to don a wedding gown alongside Anise. Later. Not right now. Eugene managed to steady his trembling expression. He was relieved that it wasn't an immediate prospect. If they had insisted on a wedding ceremony right away, Eugene would have had no choice but to steadfastly refuse. However, if it was in the future, wasn't it possible they would have had a change of heart? So what should we do next? Eugene finally asked after collecting his thoughts. Before considering the peaceful future, he pondered the ones who needed to be vanquished immediately. The abyssal princess Iris, who had turned into a great pirate in the south, was a thorn in the side of the Sea Kingdom Shimuan. Initially, Shimuan had clandestinely supported Iris in a bid to control the southern sea. However, it was simply inconceivable for a single kingdom to control a dark elf who had been famous since the era of war centuries ago. Iris' exploits had now expanded beyond control, and her band of frenzied pirates was not only preying on commercial ships but also military vessels. The queen of the night demons, Norgiabella, was another monstrous figure. Defeating a weakened Raizakia had been quite challenging, almost impossible. However, Norgiabella of this era was on a whole different level. The demon race fed on human energy and souls. Among them, the night demons were a race specifically specialized in draining human energy and their spirit. Noir was a duke with absolute authority within Helmuth, and the two territories she governed, Giabella City and Dreamia, were particularly densely populated by humans within Helmuth. And that wasn't all. Under Noir's command were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of night demons. Moreover, the night demons under her rule weren't active just in her two territories but had also spread across the continent. Whether through legal or illegal means, they sold dreams desired by humans and gathered energy, which of course, was surrendered to Noir. In other words, Noir had been growing stronger every single day for the past 300 years. A demon on par with the Demon King, Noir referred to herself as such. It was not an exaggeration. The queen of the night demons, who had been surpassing her prime every day for 300 years, had now achieved a power worthy of being called a Demon King. The blade of incarceration, Gavid Lindman. Eugene was unable to accurately gauge his power. They had clashed swords in roar, but Gavid had restrained his attacks then. Gavid didn't possess any territory. Although he was the commander of the Black Mist, that was strictly in the capacity of a commander rather than having the Black Mist as his subjects. Gavid had no subjects. Having subjects was incredibly important in increasing one's power as a demon, but Gavid was an exception. The reason was the demonic sword, Glory, and the demon eye of divine glory. Why would he need to increase his power as a demon when he could freely use the power of the Demon King of Incarceration? If the Demon King of Incarceration had grown stronger over the last few centuries, Gavid could also revel in his master's growth. But there were other enemies to kill besides these three. There was an enemy Eugene needed to kill no matter what. You said it was Amelia Merwin, right? Asked Sienna with a scowl. That despicable wench, she desecrated your grave and turned your corpse into a death knight. Amelia Merwin was one of the three mages of incarceration, the dungeon master of the desert. Although she was a wizard of this era, she was not to be taken lightly. Even Balzac had said so. Of the three mages, Edmund was likely the most skilled wizard, but the strongest was Amelia. And Amelia had likely become the new master of Vladimir. She was already irritating and shady, but now she had likely become the staff of incarceration after becoming the master of Vladimir. I don't know how powerful the wizards of this era are. Do you think they are stronger than me? Asked Sienna. They might be lacking in magic compared to you. However, it won't be easy to kill them either, Eugene answered honestly. They would have to wage war against the desert kingdom of Nahama to kill Amelia. To make matters worse, all the wizards and dark wizards of the desert dungeon were claimed to be under Amelia's command. What about an assassination attempt? We could try, but to assassinate that damned woman, we'd have to infiltrate the desert dungeon. The desert where Amelia had established herself was famous even in Nahama. It was the Ashur Desert, the Death Desert, a place where not even the locals dared tread. This entire desert was Amelia's domain. The best option would be to lure Amelia out of the desert. But that won't be easy, said Eugene. Should we strike the desert with a meteor shower? Sienna mumbled. If they were willing to wage war, it was worth considering. Even if they don't want to, they would have to crawl out if a meteor shower fell on them. It wouldn't matter how deep underground they were hiding. We just need to evaporate the accumulated sand, overturn the ground, and drag them out. Sienna strongly expressed her killing intent. The grave and the body were the things she had failed to protect from Vermouth. But then somebody, not even Vermouth but another dark wizard, created a death knight from her beloved Hamel's corpse? It was unforgivable. It will be better to take care of Iris first, Anise spoke up. The death of Edmund didn't prompt any reaction from the Demon King of Incarceration. But it's uncertain whether they will remain silent even after Amelia's death. Plus, there are many issues we'd have to consider before killing Amelia. But there would be no such issues with Iris. She had lost her territory and left Helmuth. Moreover, Iris had no connections with the Demon King of Incarceration. In addition, if Eugene decided to kill Iris, Shimuan would gladly lend their power. Killing Iris first would surely provoke reactions from the others. Amelia was aware of Eugene's intention to kill. Amelia herself also harbored the intent to kill Eugene. Mor wouldn't come to kill Eugene. She was waiting for Eugene to come and kill her. Gavid wouldn't draw his sword until Eugene came to Babel. All right, Sienna nodded. It was still uncertain how much of a ripple effect Iris's death would create. Regardless, Sienna also wanted to kill Iris. She had killed and corrupted countless elves during the war, and Sienna considered her a personal enemy. That said, they couldn't just go right away. Given how formidable Iris was, they had to make sufficient preparations. We have to go home and deal with Raizakia's corpse as well. Eugene thought. He would need to inform Ariardel. The Red Dragon had been hoping for Raizakia's death. Let's get moving. Sienna stood up, pulling her chair back. Eugene stared at her with wide eyes. Where to? Sienna snorted before pointing outside the window. Eugene followed her hand and gave a hollow laugh upon seeing their destination. She was pointing towards the heart of the capital, Abram, the royal castle of Arath. Tremple Vizarda was an archwizard of the 8th Circle and the most prominent battle mage in Arath. In Arath, his position was that of the commander of the court wizards, but in these peaceful times devoid of war, he had to perform more duties advising the royal family on magic than actual battle mage activities. Like right now. Tremple scrunched up his face in displeasure, scratching his head in frustration. It was because of yesterday's sudden weather change. He had inspected the magic system of the floating station, but there had been no plan for snow yesterday. There was no error in the magic system either. Who on earth could it be? The snowfall from yesterday was the work of a mysterious wizard. This unidentified wizard had breached the floating station's magic system, causing snow to fall over the entire capital. It was truly an unbelievable thing. The floating station, which controlled the capital's weather and even performed the role of a warp gate, was under strict security and control. Even within the royal family, only Tremple and a handful of high-ranking court wizards had the ability to interfere with it. Moreover, the interference spell could only be executed here in the royal castle of Abram. Additionally, the spell could not be activated without the king's approval. The natural suspects that came to mind were the tower heads of Arath. It was definitely possible for archwizards in the 8th Circle to somehow interfere with the floating station. In fact, interference would be impossible for anyone who wasn't an archwizard. If he could narrow down the suspects to the tower masters. Tremple squinted and turned his head. Why not be honest at this point? He asked. The White Tower Master, Melkith El-Haya, was the only suspect among the tower masters. Why would the other tower masters do such a thing? Of course, following a similar logic, there was no reason for Melkith to change the weather either. But Tremple knew all too well that the White Tower Master was not a person who could be understood with common sense. White Tower Master. You just returned to Aroth yesterday, Tremple continued with his inquiry. No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? Furthermore, the incident occurred on the very day you returned. Why would I do such a thing? Melkith yelled out in frustration. She had just returned the previous day from a lengthy trip. Once back at the White Tower, she had been in the middle of throwing a celebratory party with the other wizards and spirit wizards for her successful contract with Ifrit. That was when Tremple and the court wizards stormed in and arrested her, bringing her all the way here. I won't forget this, you old coot. I've told you countless times I'm innocent. Why won't you listen? Melkith shouted again. There are no traces left of interference with the floating station. Only an archwizard with exceptional and meticulous skills could achieve that. Well, I guess I am an archwizard with exceptional and meticulous skills. Should I take that as a confession then? Tremple asked. He squinted at Melkith. Although he had brought her in, she was a tower master and there wasn't clear evidence. He couldn't use strong interrogation methods either. But I didn't do it. Why would I make it snow? There's a precedent. White Tower Master No Melkith Elhaya. You created thunderstorms in the past when you wanted to form a pact with the Spirit King of Lightning. Tremple tried explaining patiently. I've already paid for that. The royal family of Aroth confiscated all my wealth at the time. Do you know how miserable and hard it was for me? I was penniless and even had to sell my mansion. I was living in the White Tower. Melkith sounded indignant. Furthermore, this had happened decades ago. Melkith shivered when she recalled the unpleasant memory. She wished she could summon the Spirit Kings and raise a storm, but it was impossible to cast even the simplest magic in Abram. The only ones who could use magic in this White Palace were the royal family and the court magicians who had sworn loyalty to the royal family. And the thunderstorm I conjured it such that it only covered my mansion, didn't I? I don't understand why you are upset. Of course, the thunderstorm only occurred over your property. But didn't dozens of lightning bolts scatter in all directions? Tremple asked after a pause. There were no casualties. Melkith argued back. That was a divine providence. If there were any casualties, not only would your assets have been confiscated, but you would also have been on the gallows. Let's not talk about the past. I was immature. And, in the end, didn't my pact with the Spirit King of Lightning significantly raise the prestige of the magic kingdom of Aroth? I did it for Aroth. Melkith proclaimed while puffing up her chest. Tremple gritted his teeth, feeling his fist clenching. He had to take a deep breath to collect himself. Fortunately, no accidents occurred due to yesterday's snow. There were no casualties. It wasn't as dangerous as lightning. If you admit your crime now, I will ensure that it ends with a fine, not the confiscation of all your assets. What do you say? No, I didn't do it. Why won't you listen to me? Why would I make it snow, huh? Said Melkith, exasperated. You might have made it snow to contract with the Spirit King of Snow. I'll try that somewhere other than Aroth in the future. Anyway, I didn't do it. Melkith crossed her arms and cocked her head. I admit, I do look suspicious. But I really didn't do it, okay? And it wasn't just me who returned to Aroth yesterday. What about the Red Tower Master? Lovely and Sophies. Why didn't you arrest that guy? The Red Tower Master would not do such a thing, Tremple stated flatly. That's what you call prejudice. Why do you think I would do it and the Red Tower Master wouldn't? He may have been building his image to take advantage of such a crucial moment. Nonsense. Or Balzac Ludbeth. That bastard is super suspicious. He hasn't returned to Aroth yet, has he? It could all be a show. He may be sneaking around plotting something. Are you implying Balzac is your accomplice? Look, Tremple, you seem to have no talent for leading an investigation, Melkith declared. Tremple scowled even more and checked the system of the floating station. Or, it could be the work of a spy from another country who has infiltrated Aroth. Yesterday's snow could have been a test for a larger terrorist attack. Tremple, we don't have time for you to detain me and talk nonsense. Someone might be planning a catastrophic attack on the capital or a coup against the royal family. Normally, Tremple would dismiss such words as nonsense, but he could not afford to right now. In the first place, he had detained Melkith because he had similar suspicions. Interfering with the magic system of the floating station meant being able to create meteorological changes in the capital at will. Normally, the floating station was sure to prevent weather disasters, But what if someone could freely unlock the limits? And if, by chance, they could interfere with the warp gate, it could truly result in a catastrophic loss of life. We're already investigating that. You are the likeliest of the suspects, which is why I'm interrogating you myself. Don't you have any video records? If we had such things, I would not be questioning you right now. The culprit left no traces. Not even a shadow. Fine. I'll cooperate. We'll catch the culprit together. We don't have time. A devastating plan that threatens Aroth might be closing in. Even Abram might be under direct. Rumbly. Before she could finish, the ground began to shake under their feet. Tremple jumped up from his seat and glared at Melkith. Melkith Al-Haya. You are under arrest for treason against the royal family. Why, you've already arrested me, so what are you saying? Why, you do not think that an accomplice is here to rescue me or something, right? Even Melkith had to admit that the timing had been immaculate.